Welcome to this episode of Done Dissertation Office Hours, where we will talk with doctoral students and folks who have earned their doctorate about how they have gone through their dissertation process and what they've been able to do with their dissertations or plan to do with the dissertations after they finish their doctoral programs. I'm the host of the show. My name is Dr. Ramon Goings. I'm founder of Done Dissertation, where our goal as a company is to help doctoral students write and defend their dissertation in 1 year or less. Today's guest, I've been having the privilege of watching online and seeing this amazing content about life as a doctoral student. And so I wanted to bring more folks on who are just in the process of writing their dissertations to talk about what they've been able to do. And someone I've been following online for a while is our guest today, just seeing how she's been able to leverage content creation, but still connected to her research and then be able to do all these things while managing just life generally. And so I have a special guest today, Kaelyn Grace Apple, who is currently a doctoral candidate in the Department of History and African American Studies at Yale University. So Kaelyn, welcome to today's episode.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. So like I said, I've been following your work for a while, and I love to see doc students kind of like show both sides. Like I'm doing research, but I'm also having a life, and I'm like able to integrate the content creation. And so I'm just curious in terms of your, decided, you're in the doctoral program in history. Have you always been interested in history? Like, what was your journey like just with history as a discipline in general? Like, what got you to this point?
I always really loved history. When I was a kid, I think the first moment that I recognized that I was really interested in history was my mom, for some reason, had told me about the Titanic.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up going to the library and doing a bunch of research and just got really interested in the topic. And so I ended up spending like basically 2 years learning everything there was to know about the Titanic and like more specifically like the social history that kind of surrounded the passengers on the Titanic. And so I think that that was probably my first indication that I was really interested in history and more specifically history research, and never really thought of it as something that I could study or take on as a career, especially growing up in the Bay Area with parents who wanted to see me go down the route of, business or law. And the decision to actually pursue history as a subject didn't really come about until I was in community college.
So, when you have this love and start to develop a passion for history, then what makes you decide, you know what, I'm going to get a PhD in this thing? And so, like,
Yeah.
what was that journey? Did you always know that you wanted to get a PhD, or like what point during your education journey you say, you know what, actually PhD might be the route I may go with this thing?
No, what's funny is that I actually thought I was going to go to law school, and I
Mm,
had gone to community college, and then I was uh, at UCLA as a transfer student.
sure.
And I had gone up to one of my professors. It was his first year of teaching, and his name is Dr. Kyle Mays, and he's a history professor of Afro-Indigenous history.
Mhm.
And I went to him because there was a lecture that I wanted to go to, or I think it was a conference. And I basically went to him and I said, "Is there funding for undergrads to do this kind of thing?" And I just remember he kind of gave me this sideways glance, and he looked at me and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I think I want to go to law school." And he's like, "No, I think you want to do a PhD." And
I love it.
I just remembered saying, "Yeah, I don't think I'm smart enough for that. I don't know. I don't think so. Like maybe I'll do a master's, but I don't think I'll get a PhD."
Sure.
And he said, "Okay, come to talk to me in a year and we'll see what you think." And I said, "Okay." And so I started like pursuing doing the thesis, and it was voluntary at UCLA. You didn't have to write a thesis.
Sure.
And I had gone to study abroad for a summer at Cambridge, and I just remember being in Cambridge and studying English common law, and then suddenly seeing all of these connections to what I was studying about early American uh, colonial legal culture, etc. And I had all these questions, and I just felt like there wasn't enough space to pursue all of them. And I finished that program, and I remember I got home and I had this identity crisis because I was studying for the LSAT. I was supposed to apply to law
Oh,
school,
wow. Yeah.
and I just remember I went to my advisor for my thesis and I said, I think I want to go to grad school. And he said, "I normally don't recommend my students go to grad school." The job market's terrible, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, he looks at me and he says, but this is the exception. I think you should go to grad school.
Wow.
And then I went back to Kyle Mays and I said, okay, all right, you were right. I want to do a PhD.
Gotcha.
And he ended up giving me a lot of mentorship and guidance, and he still does. And yeah, so if it wasn't for those really supportive professors, I don't think I would have even thought that that path was something that was viable for someone like me. And yeah, so it set me down the path of research, and I still have so many questions on so many things that I'm exploring. And I think that that's what makes a really strong PhD researcher, as somebody that's going to, go through the process and make it to the end, as somebody who's really invested in the question and finding the answers. And yeah, I'm really glad that I charted down this path.
No, that's cool. To have a professor that sees that in you. I had a student like that. She recently finished her doctorate. That when she was my master's student, I just looked at her. I said, "Are you trying to get a PhD?" And she's like, "Well, how did you know?" I said, "Sometimes you can just see it." So I think it's something about professors. Sometimes we can see it in some students. So
Yeah.
I get that. That's great that you had that experience. And so now, you're in California. So now, how do you get from California to Yale and New Haven? So I'm from Connecticut originally. I used to work in New
Oh,
Haven.
really?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that. It's a very different environment to
Very.
California. So what gets you to Yale kind of in the first place? What was your journey like, just deciding on a university to attend?
Yeah. So when I was finishing up my time at UCLA, I remember I had a conversation with a bunch of professors, and they basically said you can apply directly to the PhD. However, what we'd recommend is that you get more research experience, because I'd really only written the thesis and there just wasn't very much time as a community college transfer student to, really flex my skills and develop that side of my toolkit. And so they had basically said, I would recommend that you apply to master's programs. And at the time, I was still trying to decide, am I going to go down the history route, or am I going to go down the legal route, and more so legal research? And so I applied to two different types of master's programs in the UK. So I applied for history programs at Oxford and Cambridge, and then I applied for human rights law at a bunch of the universities in London. And I ended up getting into almost all of the programs I applied to, but one of them was Oxford. And it was while I was at Oxford that I had thought really strategically about how is it that I can leverage my time in the UK. That's a 9-month program, and really ensure that I put myself in a good position to apply for PhD programs. And so at the time, the advice essentially was that you should pick a university, based on prestige and based on placement stats and all of that kind of thing. And so I was looking for prestigious programs that had, well supported stipends and things of that nature. I was also looking at programs that had a really strong AFAM department. So it was really important to me to get training in Black studies, given that I was studying the history of Atlantic slavery. And so it was really important to me to find a program that had a really strong history department, but that also had a really close relationship with its AFAM department. And so that led me to apply to a bunch of different places, but Yale ended up being one of them. And yeah, and so then I got in, and then I moved my entire life and all
Yeah.
of the things, and my dog and all of it across the country.
Yeah.
It was like during COVID when I moved. And so I was working during COVID because all of my family basically got laid off. And I worked and finished my master's dissertation and saved up money. And then I did a road trip, and then I ended up in Connecticut.
Wow. That's amazing. And so what was that experience like going to Oxford and just having a different environment in terms of educationally, and just, how did
Yeah.
that, and how do you see that setting you up to be successful in your PhD program back in the States?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I'll answer this in two parts. The academic culture in the UK, and specifically in Oxbridge, is very different from what I was used to,
Mm,
in that it's the way that the subject is taught. I think that the general kind of intellectual rigor just felt like people were more clued in
gotcha.
and had more experience with research because of the longer dissertation process that undergraduates need to go through at Oxbridge. And it was also quite different in that it was quite antiquated in many ways. I remember getting a syllabus for my historiography class, and there was only one Black author on the list, and there was basically no women. There was a week for women at the end of the
Wow.
semester.
Okay. Gotcha.
And yeah, and the one author that they had was W.E.B. Du Bois. And just looking at this particular syllabus, thinking, yeah, the profession has moved well beyond many of the conversations that are being included in the syllabus. So I'm
Sure.
interested in how somebody else is going to go. However, I will say that despite that, there were professors there that I thought were just absolutely incredible, and they were really supportive. My advisor in particular is an incredible scholar of women's reproductive history. And the second part of my answer is that I think it set me up for the kind of isolation that you experience in graduate school, and the like the personal dependence that you have when you're writing your dissertation. When I was in undergrad, there was so many touch points with my advisor. I saw him like once a week, and I felt like I was really supportive throughout the project. And there were other people writing the thesis at the same time that I saw often, and undergraduate environments just, offer that type of camaraderie. Whereas at Oxford, I found that we were sent off to go write our dissertations in, a couple of months, and they basically just threw us out to figure it out. And
Yeah.
on the one hand, that was terrifying. However, on the other hand, it actually was a really strong indication of whether or not I was going to be able to handle the PhD.
Sure.
And so I'm really glad that I actually had that experience, because the moments when I feel so confused and like I can't really get through and I don't know what to write, and I don't know what direction to go in, I at least have evidence that I've done this before.
Yeah.
I'm like, you figure this out. You had these feelings before. And I think another part of that is that I also documented that on YouTube. So anytime I have this kind of, it's like intellectual amnesia
Yeah.
about what it's like to actually do this kind of work, I can actually go back and I can see me work through these problems before and remind myself that, you've been through this experience, you've had these feelings, you've had these same hangups before, and you can get through it this time because you've gotten through it in the past.
Yeah. And so, you get into your PhD program, and did you find that, was there any acclimation period to like the level of writing needed for a PhD program? Or did you find like coming from master's to PhD, it was like, I just need to adjust this a couple of things, but it was pretty seamless?
No, I would say that my transition to Yale was pretty abrupt, and I would say it's still a bit challenging.
Sure.
I came from community college and was working full time at the point when I was trying to transfer. And my time at UCLA, I think, was really strong, and I got a lot of experience. But there was pretty much only one professor who ever really sat me down and tried to help me develop my writing. And Oxford, I think, developed my writing quite a bit. It developed my ability to argue. However, what's interesting about my time at Yale is that I feel like I'm more self-conscious of a writer than I ever have been. And I think that that's just the comparison factor of being around a bunch of students that are incredible scholars in their own right already
Sure.
and are going to lead their field in future. However, what I will say is that when I'm talking about comparison and seeing the quality of writing that my peers are able to produce,
Right.
and feeling a little insecure about that, I also remember that we have very different goals. We have very different research, and I'm going to cheer them on, and I want to see them land their tenure track jobs, and I'll probably going down a different path, and
Yeah.
that's totally okay. And it's just reminding yourself of that along the way, I think, is helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, as you navigated the coursework of your program, you started kind of get towards writing your dissertation. Did you come into your program already with your dissertation topic, like
I
already kind of
did.
solidified? Okay. So did that
I
make it
did.
easier for you in terms of coursework? Did you like tie every paper towards like fleshing out ideas around your dissertation topic?
I did. The one challenge that I faced in the first couple of years of coursework, and this is what I recommend now to anybody that's going into a PhD program, is be really strategic about the connections that you make with professors and the way that you're using your coursework in order to flesh out different aspects of your research. Because it was during COVID, we just didn't have the same kind of access to archival materials that I wish I had had and had more time to work with when I was in coursework stage, because I feel like I'm having to do a little bit of catch up now. However, I would say that actually preparing for comprehensive exams was probably the point in which it really began to solidify, because the idea I had had since undergrad, but the way I was going to actually go about it really developed as I was in the latter stages of my coursework and was preparing for comprehensive exams.
No, that makes sense. And so now that you're in the process of, a year into actually doing the work, what's the focus of your research project now? And then how is that
Yeah.
shaping up so far? And I don't know how far out you see you from being complete with everything that you need to do.
Yeah, so I originally began the research with an interest in this matrilineal descent principle that becomes a kind of mainstay of the way that we consider the development of Atlantic world slavery. And it starts in the English Atlantic with a law that's passed in Virginia that states that all children born to an enslaved woman will therefore be enslaved. And so I was really interested in reproductive labor and the concept of matrilineal descent and kinship. And that has slowly developed as I've studied the law to actually think more so about how settler colonialism and how the law of like the early American English colonies, how they were geared towards developing a system of intergenerational forced child labor. And so matrilineal descent plays a role, but seeing how instead thinking more so about that intergenerational component as it pertains to the child themselves is where my intellectual like kind of intervention exists, because there's so many incredible scholars that are working on Black women's sexuality and matrilineal descent and reproductive labor, and that includes scholars like Jennifer Morgan. And I think that they've done an incredible job. And I don't have much to add in terms of their specific conversation. And so as I'm looking through these documents and looking at them with a slightly different set of questions than the other scholars have, I'm seeing that the intergenerational component is the piece that seems to be missing in the historiography. And so my hope is to investigate that and to hopefully offer a dissertation that contributes to future work for other scholars and allows us to ask a new set of questions.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think something you probably are aware of this too is like, even though you said you didn't want to do anything, you were interested in law, you still figure out a way to tie it and connect it to the history. So you haven't lost that piece per se. It's still there in your work, which I think is cool.
No, I absolutely believe that you should be able to find ways to, embed all of your interests in some way, whether it might not necessarily make it into your research itself, but there's always ways that it sneaks in. So I'm very much a social historian, but the law finds its way in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, for a lot of folks, doctoral students who might be watching, they're trying to figure out, all right, I have my topic, I know where I'm going with this thing, but how do I structure life to be able to get things done? And so, like for you, what does your day look like in order to carve out time to make sure the research gets done amidst, I don't know if you have other responsibilities, how do you able to kind of piece all that together?
So knowing myself and knowing that deadlines are the thing that, creates that urgency, I try to set up a system where I know that I can focus and I can write for about an hour or two a day at most when there's not a pressing deadline. And so what I try to do is review archival records and the secondary literature, and I have like a focused hour or two that I have to write. And I can stare at the piece of paper, I can make I can make, bullet points, I can try to write a paragraph, but I am not allowed to read. And that's, I think, one trap that historians in particular and other humanists get into is there's never a point in which you can read too much. And so it makes it difficult to want to get to the writing part. And so I set a timer for a minimum an hour or two per day where I have to sit down and I have to just stare at my document and find a way to get words onto it, which might not sound entirely strategic, but it is helpful to know that there is an hour or two out of my day where I need to face my dissertation, and I have to work with it. And then the other time I am reading and coding my archival documents and those types of things, because as the project develops, there's always more literature to dig into, but I have to make sure that I make the time to sit down and write.
Now, let me ask you this, because I always ask this question to writers. Are you a morning writer, afternoon, evening? What's your ideal for you writing time?
So first thing in the morning is best if I am not stressed.
Okay.
For some reason, when it's the day-to-day, the best is for me to get up, go for my morning workout, come back, make breakfast, sit down, and make myself write for an hour. And when I have a deadline, I really struggle to write in the morning. So I will sit down on my computer and I will try to write, but for some reason, like when there's a pressing deadline, the midnight hour just somehow magic happens then. And it's the witching hour. Yeah. And then I just am kind of aware that when a deadline is coming up, that my sleep schedule is essentially just going to go somewhat out the window. I am trying to figure out how to develop a system that's a bit more sustainable than that, because there are many deadlines to work towards. But generally, first thing in the morning, before I really jump into my email or content or looking at the literature, anything, I have to sit down, I have to look at my document and see what I can make of it in an hour or two. And then the less like kind of intellectually taxing pieces, which is the reading and the coding, to me, that stuff I can focus quite easily on. But the writing is the part that I want to avoid the most. And so that's the thing I have to do first.
I got you. And so I'm just curious on the reading side, since that's a part that you enjoy and have developed kind of probably a system for. What's your process to read and like ingest information? Like, do you like annotate? Like, what does that look like? I know some students are trying to figure out, I know I have to read, and I'm just trying to figure out the best system in order to capture what I'm reading.
Well, anybody that's listening to this podcast should definitely check out my YouTube channel, where I made a video called How to Read, like a PhD student, because there's different types of reading. So there's reading for class, there's reading for retention, and then there's reading for research. And so when I'm reading for research, I am looking for three primary things. I'm looking for pieces of the text that I think are quotable, or that offer an argument directly. So a statement that this chapter will argue blank, that kind of thing. So the main thesis, the main plot points of the author. The second thing that I annotate for is secondary literature. So looking at any references to the secondary literature that I think are going to be relevant for me. And then the third thing I'm looking for is indication of primary sources or a quote from a primary source that is included within a secondary text. My process for reading primary sources is slightly different, but yeah, the basic structure is that I am reading for those three main things. I'm looking for the main points, mentions of secondary literature that I think are going to be relevant, and then primary sources that I need to do some further digging on.
No, I love that. And I think it's always important just to have a strategy, right? It doesn't matter. The strategies may look different for each of us, but just to have a strategy in place. And so you've been able to implement that's perfect. And as you're writing your dissertation, but again, as I mentioned at the intro, I found you via social media in terms of some of your content, and also some of my team did. We were looking for other doctoral students to talk to who are doing this, who are in this space, but also talk about it on their own platforms. And so I came across your work. And so what was your reason behind like going into the kind of content creation space?
Yeah. So I started my YouTube channel back in 2019. I had just finished my undergraduate studies and I was applying, or I had just gotten into Oxford. And when I was looking to apply to graduate school, I was trying to use a lot of the methods that I had used in order to work on my application for undergrad, which was to look for study tubers and other people making admissions related content. And when I went to go look for graduate school related content, there was only one person on all of YouTube that made good quality content consistently who had actually documented the process. And so his name is Simon Clark, and he was a physics PhD student at Exeter. And so one, there was no humanists. Two, he didn't really share the kind of intricacies of the process. And thirdly, I didn't see anybody online talking about the process of going from community college to a PhD. And I really love YouTube content. I love videos. I have since I was a kid. I've been watching YouTube since like 2007. And when I got into Oxford, I knew that I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity to myself, but also I wanted to be able to share how I did it, because a lot of the way I went about applying was
Sure.
by crowdsourcing a bunch of research and conversations and whatnot from graduate students and professors and assistant professors and all of that. Like I spoke to so many people, and so I basically crowdsourced all this information about graduate admissions. And I was like, well, if I didn't live on campus, if I didn't have access to this information, there's no way I would have gotten into a school like Oxford. There's no way I would have gotten into a place like Yale. And so I wanted to make that information accessible, and I also wanted to document my experience so that way I could look back on it years from then. And yeah, so that's what got me started. And the thing that keeps me going is that element that I haven't seen anybody really document the intricacies, the ups and the downs, and the intellectual journey of a PhD. And so I wanted to be the first, essentially.
No, that's cool. Yeah, you got started early. That makes great. That was a great plan that you executed there. So what would you say to doc students? Because there's some folks who want to get into this content creation space, but feel like it's something extra to do on top of what they already have to do with competing interests for getting their studies done. Maybe some folks might have work, other responsibilities. So like, how have you been able to carve the time out for content creation, or do you have some strategy to make it all make sense together?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say is that there's a bit of a mindset shift that I've worked with so many graduate students that want to become content creators, or anybody that wants to become a content creator. And they're like, oh, how do I make the time? And the thing that I do in terms of my mindset is thinking these are connected. Like my research and my ability to develop this dissertation is actually interdependent on my content and my ability to share this process, that I don't want to do one without the other. And my YouTube is also an intellectual journal. It's, it's a place where I talk about my ideas out loud, and I figure out my answers, and I share this process with other people. And it also has given me so many resources and support networks, and it's offered me this community that I genuinely don't think I would have been able to get to this stage of my PhD had I not had this support network. And so you have to think about YouTube and content creation generally as, it's not just like this other thing, and it's not even just a creative outlet. It's you investing in your community. It's you investing in your well-being as a graduate student. And it's also exercising a set of skills that are going to be incredibly valuable inside or outside of academia in the future. And I just don't really see it as something that's like separate.
Yeah.
While yes, it does take extra time, it's something that it's just such a part of my day. It's just such a part of my being that, if anything, the times when I'm not making content is usually when like things are not going well.
I got you.
And my community knows that. Like if I'm not posting on stories, I'll get messages from people that are like, "Are you okay?
Yeah.
Where are you?" And yeah, when I'm documenting the process and I feel like things are moving, that's usually an indication that my research is going well. And so yeah, I can't live without it. And
Yeah.
so it's not something that I think of as like, oh, it's like this additional thing. If anything, I think of like going to the gym as like that additional thing that's like
Sure,
going to
of
take an
course.
extra 2 hours out of my day. And I'm like, oh, you should do it because it makes you feel better and it makes you think better. But I don't want to.
Yeah.
But I don't know, for some reason, content to me just feels like a part of the process. It feeds me in some way, and yes, it also accrues an income, so there's no denying that, and that has also been incredibly helpful. But yeah, I love making content, so
Yeah, no, that's cool. And like, I guess for you, are you at a point yet where because you're trying to write and do all these other things, do
Mhm.
you do like all your like in a day you would record, you do all the recording yourself, and do you do all the editing yourself at this
I
point, or have
do.
you gotten to a point where you still have you started outsourcing like editing
Uh,
yet?
I outsourced for about 6 months when I think it was, like, my 2nd or 3rd year at Yale,
Yeah.
and I just didn't like making videos as much when I was outsourcing, and so it's bad business advice, but at the end of the day, I also had built, like, a business with, like, 12 employees and all of that, and I found that incredibly stressful, whereas if it's only me that is impacted by me posting a video or not, and
Mm,
I don't have to worry about paying somebody's salary,
yeah.
then it makes the process less burdensome, and also just allows me to create what I want. And while that's like not great social media strategy, I've also done the social media strategy side. Like there was a year that I was really focused on growing, and that did really well. I gained like 40,000 subscribers on YouTube in a year, but it also cost a lot creatively that I didn't enjoy making the content as much. So I'm at a point now, I'm
Mm,
5 years into making content. So I've been
yeah.
making content for a while now. And I just want to make what I want to like what I want to make. And I want to make sure that it has an impact. And that impact doesn't have to go any further than me. Like if I like the video, then that's impact enough.
That's cool.
But if it's also valuable to other people, that's an additional value add. And so I do think about resources that I can put out there that are going to be helpful for people and helpful for people in the future. And I also just think about making stuff that makes me happy and that I want to be able to look back on and that is like creatively exciting because I love cameras and film and all of that. So
No, that's cool. Oh yeah, we gotta talk tech then after, maybe after. I'm curious to see
oh
in
yes.
that thing. Okay, that'll be cool. So I'm just curious. You mentioned the 40,000 subscribers, and you kind of went kind of aggressively to kind of build that platform
Yeah.
on YouTube. What was your strategy? Did you have to make more wider content that appeal to more
Mm.
people to bring them in, or like what was your like thought process through that time when you kind of aggressively went at it?
My advice when you're wanting to get into a mode of strategic growth is to look at what's performing well and what performs well for other people. But also you just have to look back at yourself and think like, okay, what's performed well? What do people ask for from me? And anytime I made how to content, that always performed well, outperformed my other content.
Yeah,
And that's what led to new people. And I knew that there was a bunch of content on like how to take notes as a student and how to read like a student and how to use an iPad like a student, etc. But I didn't see anybody making how to read like a PhD student, how to write like a PhD student, how to manage your time like a PhD student. And so I just decided, you know what, screw it. I'll just like make this make this series
yeah,
and I'll just edit it like mad. Like the how to write like a PhD no, how to read like a PhD student took me 16 hours to edit.
wow,
That but that video, and this is the one that kind of burnt me out, but that video in particular, I just remembered saying, okay, I know that people are asking for this. It's something I would look up if I were starting a program.
yeah,
I want to do this one time. I want to do it
mhm,
really well. And so I'm going to bust my butt to make sure this is the best video on my channel.
yeah,
And yeah, so I did that and then it went viral. I mean, I think it has like 1.4 million views
yeah,
now. It's but it's a special video in that it was a creative challenge for me to try
yeah.
to figure out, okay, do I know enough about YouTube? Do I know enough about content creation? Do I know enough about SEO and all of that to create a video that's gonna get some reach? And it got way more reach than I expected.
Yeah, especially in this space, right? Because some people say, well, this is a pretty small niche, PhD students, folks who are trying to get a doctorate. But I can imagine other folks are going to see a video like that and it might be applicable to a master's student, even though it says PhD, but it'll be applicable kind of
Yeah.
across the board.
The other thing is that you have to keep in mind, and this is why I push back when people say that you need a niche. or that like the niche like matters that much. Because the thing is that, I mean, there are people that watch my channel that aren't in academia. They don't like, I had somebody stop me on the street the other day that like works in parliament, and they went to undergrad. They're never going to go to grad school, but they somehow found my YouTube channel.
Right.
And you just realize that that people just have random interests. Like I follow nurses and lawyers and people that are getting MBAs and whatnot. I don't plan on doing any of those things, but I just find their life really interesting and the way that they approach problems really interesting. So the thing about content creation is the niche is you and how you approach things. And if you can do that in a way that communicates very clearly and in a way that is, clear and visually appealing and all those things, then you kind of develop your voice and you develop your brand. And this is the thing that I try to teach anybody that'll listen.
No, I love it. That's great.
Yeah, don't think about categorizing yourself. Think more so about like, how is it that I communicate things in a unique way based on, my life experience, my career, whatever.
Yeah, that's so important. I think folks, and I even think people should consider that, because I see content creation in writing a dissertation very similar, right? So it's like you have a space that you want to end up contributing to, but it could be a composite of all of your interests, right? You can figure out a way, like you did with your dissertation, history. I'm going to focus on history, but there's still some legal component to me that I still love, the legal aspects of it. So I'm going to figure out a way to tie that all together. And I think that content creation, you can showcase everything, but that's really great that you've been able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we're complex human beings. We have a variety of interests, and those interests evolve and they change, and we want to share new things. And so there was a point in which I felt like I was the PhD creator, and I started to resent that because I felt like I couldn't talk about anything else. And now I just kind of create what feels right, what feels good. And that might not be the best, growth strategy, but it is the best sustainable strategy. Correct. Because I want to be making content for the next 10 years.
Correct.
And so what I post tomorrow doesn't really matter.
No, that's great that you've approached it that way. And did this, guys, in terms of content creation, then help you to build out the Accepted Society? Is that how this happened? Or like, how you kind of give us the backstory about how this happens, how you build your community?
Yeah. So Accepted Society actually started kind of on its own in that it was during COVID. I just started my PhD, and the one thing I missed more than anything was going to the library with my friends. And so I decided that I would just put out these study sessions that people could join. And, you would pay, I think it was like $5, and you could join my, 3-hour study session. And it just kind of grew this little community of people that just kept showing up, and it just kept growing and growing. And then eventually I decided to kind of formalize it, and I created a website, and I created a community space that originally we were like on Slack, and then it evolved even further. And now we've got Mighty Networks, and we've got a community of like 200 people around the world, and we run writing groups and study sessions. We also do monthly planning sessions. We have a book club that meets on Sundays. We also have like a sip and share event where people can, present on their research and practice if they've got a conference coming up and they just want a friendly crowd to join in. And it's a community of people that I think don't really feel like they have their right space in academia. And so Accepted Society is this really wonderful community of people from all different education levels. So we've got people in community college all the way through to tenured professors that are in the community, and people in all different disciplines. So we've got scientists, humanists, social scientists, independent researchers, etc. And they all just support each other, and we study together and
Love it.
And share, what's working for us and what's not working for us. And we share playlists, and it's now been around for 4 years, and it's still just growing. And we host a symposium every year, and this is the first year we're actually going to do it hybrid. So we're gonna
that's great,
have a symposium in person in Oxford. And so we do one day where we talk about, topics in academia, and we have panels, but then we also have a research day. And so people can, at all different education levels and all different disciplines, can share what it is that they're working on in an environment that doesn't feel as intimidating. And yeah, it wasn't something that I formally decided I was going to start. It was just something kind of developed, and yeah, it's really special.
Do you see it as something like post PhD that you're going to like kind of put kind of not more resources behind, but something you want to really grow? It'd be like your main source, like a income, like a almost like a company, and
Yeah.
build it out from the membership model.
Yeah, people have asked me this a lot. There were various stages where I've thought about like going for VC funding, and I've thought about
Yeah.
growing it. And actually, I recently made the decision to sell a significant portion of the business to my colleague Kate.
Okay.
So Kate's been with me on the team for about 18 months, and so the reason I made this decision is because she's a full-time employee at Google who in her 30s decided I love literature and I just really want to study literature. And so she
Yeah.
took a summer class at Oxford, and she reached out to me when she was doing this course, and she said, I want to apply for a master's degree. And I said, Game, let's help you apply for a master's
Yeah.
degree. And so she got into Oxford, and so she's in the continuing education uh, program in literature. And she to me is like the perfect representation of what I wanted accepted society to foster,
Sure.
to create that self-belief among people at whatever stage they're at and whatever background that they've come from, and whoever they are and whatever kind of learner they are, that they have a space, and that there's a community of people that support them and believe in their work and all of that. And so the reason I made the decision to hand the business to her is because, one, I felt like she was really representative of the mission that I started Accepted Society with, and that I want to maintain with Accepted Society. But secondly, I actually see my career moving away from academia,
Yeah.
and I still really believe in Accepted Society, and I still wanted to be a part of it and its growth, and to help it along into its later stages of maturity.
Yeah.
But felt that my career trajectory is going to be moving away from the the people that the community serves,
Yeah.
and so the person who is at the head of it should be somebody that is representative of what the community,
That makes sense.
supports.
Well, that's cool. I mean, that's great that you have this going and these things in place. So, speaking of that, as we wrap up, I would love to hear like, what's your plans? What do you want to do? I know you say you're moving away from academia. So, what
Yeah.
does life look like? You think as you're finishing up and Dr.
So
Athlete?
I'm really interested in education technology
Okay.
and thinking about what the future of education retention and future like how it is that education is distributed and democratized. One thing that I found quite frustrating when I started teaching uh, in my PhD program was that I am on social media. I know what, Gen Z consumes. And I'm sitting in these lecture halls, and I can see their faces going blank.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that the way that students learn today is different than it was even when I was an undergrad.
Sure.
That the type of lecture format that we're used to is not going to be sufficient in coming years. And when I have voiced this
Yeah.
concern to those in academia, the the general consensus is like, oh, well, maybe you should go into the digital humanities. Like maybe you're not like a
No.
traditionalist, maybe you're not a traditional historian. And yeah, to that I just say that, I think that we need to rethink about what historians look like in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And for example, and I think this is also important, like I mentioned that at the beginning, that I really fell in love with like learning about the Titanic and all of this stuff. And the other thing that really got me into history was documentaries and historical fiction and other forms of historical work and historical research that is not considered, historic publication. It's not considered uh, publishing in the academic sense. And knowing that I would not be here, I would not have studied history, I wouldn't have found it accessible had it not been for those mediums, that I have just kind of a frustration with seeing historic work as only being, written publications. And so yeah, I see my career going more the trajectory of education technology, perhaps education policy, something along those lines. I want my dissertation to hopefully contribute to a new conversation in the field of Atlantic slavery studies. I want it to, hopefully offer a jumping off point for other scholars in the future. But when I thought about what the tenure track looked like and all of that,
Yeah.
realized that a lot of the things that I really value would not be valued. And so I'm charting a slightly different path.
I understand. I'm all for folks finding whatever unique space makes sense for them. Like me being a faculty member, so I'm in higher, got tenure on that side, but I do entrepreneurship as well, and so like figuring out a way to blend them. So it's always about like
Yeah.
figuring out where the best fit is. So I'm all for folks doing that. I'm glad that you don't, when folks get those advice to students, I'm like, let them do what they want to do. Like folks have
Yeah.
great. We're all uniquely designed, right? And you just said it, like about even your content. It should be a reflection of who you are, and I think everyone's journey should be as well, not have to be these carbon copies of
Yeah.
other folks in our fields. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Agreed.
Yeah, but this is really helpful to hear your journey, and I think one thing, last thing I want you to leave us with is terms of for doctoral students. What advice would you give for them if they feel like they are just kind of struggling a little bit with trying to get through this process?
Mhm.
There's been things that have worked for you. If you can like impart that on to students who might be watching, that would be great.
Oh, you gotta find your people. You gotta find your community. So whether that's a person or that is a group or that's, you know, a writing group of some kind, like anybody that you can kind of lean on that understands the journey that you're on. And oftentimes these people are not going to come from your program. They're not going to come from your department. And they also don't have to necessarily be academics. But the thing that has saved me time and time again is like having my community through Accepted Society and also just co-working with my friends and being able to laugh, cry, talk out loud, think my ideas through. And I feel like we need to think about how this can be a communal experience and hopefully not so isolating, because the process of writing a dissertation is really hard, and the intellectual work of a dissertation and being a researcher is really hard, and it's best done when you have the support of people that you care about and that care about you and that care about your work.
No, I love that. We're all for. That's why initially I developed done dissertation. When I was a student, I struggled. I figured some things out. I wrote my dissertation fairly quickly, and then it got to a point I was helping other students. And then when I started talking about what I was doing, then others was like, "Man, I'm struggling too in this university setting. Or I'm struggling
Mhm.
here." And now hundreds of students later, we've helped earn their doctorates. Now we get to see like that community aspect, which you're talking about, is
Yeah.
so important. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think that's a piece that's missing for a lot of students. And with that, can you tell folks about how they can find out and learn more about Accepted Society if they are interested in learning more, becoming a member, and those type of things?
Yeah, so you can find us on social media at the Accepted Society on Instagram. You can also go to the website Accepted Society, and we are launching a new website in August,
Okay.
as well as a new updated platform. So lots of exciting things happening over there. But yeah, check us out on Instagram, and all the links are there and all of that. But we would love to have you. There's a trial period if you want to come and check it out and join a session or two and see if it's right for you. But it's a very welcoming space, and I don't think I could finish this PhD without it.
No, that's great. That's perfect. So thank you so much for being on. I'll put you behind the scenes for a second, and we'll wrap up here, and I'll come back on with you.
Sounds good.
But again, I hope folks have found a lot of value out of today's episode. Just some things to consider, that definitely finding your tribe is so important to finishing this process. And so we want to make sure that you all do that. And if you happen to be a doctoral student, you're trying to get through the process, but you need more hands-on support, more connection, more like-minded community. Also, to get that feedback on your work, to understand if you're in the right spot, we would welcome you to apply to work with us in our Velocity coaching program. You can learn more about our program at www.velocitydissertation.com. And again, our goal at Done Dissertation is to help you write and defend your dissertation in 1 year or less. So if that is something that you are interested in and you want to learn more about, please go to www.velocitydissertation.com. And I want to say thank you so much to our guests. And also, thank you so much for watching today's episode. If there are other folks you want us to interview in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on our social media website. And if you happen to be also a doctoral student who is trying to figure out how to just improve your academic writing and get some of these strategies in place to finish, we invite you to grab a free training called Elevate Your Academic Writing. It'll show you our philosophy and model on how to step by step be able to improve your academic writing. So if you need that support, you can go to www.thedonedissertation.com/elevate. And again, I want to say thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. And until next time, I will see you all soon. And cheers to a done dissertation. Take care.